Kia ora everyone from New Zealand. Now, for those of you who haven't seen me before, and this is my first visual, and then we should be doing video each time, I'll just introduce some background to you. I have been doing an audio Supermarket Sleuth on Spotify and Instagram, but we're now moving into video, and in future we'll be doing it visually each week to talk to you about supermarkets. Now, I'll start at the beginning. Who am I? John Winters. I moved to New Zealand from the UK in 1999. And as soon as I came here, I started writing about supermarkets. Now, I've been a journalist all my life, but I'd never written about supermarkets before. And it just happened by coincidence that I joined a trade magazine as editor. Trade magazine is a magazine that circulates around a particular industry. And the magazine that I was editing, in fact, was circulating between suppliers and supermarkets. So I saw both sides of the industry, and I've been writing and talking about supermarkets ever since. So hence the reason why I must admit, and I'm sure when you're looking at me first off, you might say, well, supermarkets? Oh dear, that's a bit boring. I thought the same thing when I first started writing. I thought, well, supermarkets, what can you write about supermarkets? It's all food and that sort of thing, things for the home. Not terribly exciting, but actually as I got into it and as I went around a lot of supermarkets, not only New Zealand, but Australia, China and the UK, then I began to realize what a fascinating industry it is. It's an industry that relies more upon something new than I think any other type of retail industry in the world. And there's always something coming along, and I've learned so much about supermarkets in the time I've been writing. First of all, I published a book in 2013 all about supermarkets, and then this year I've gone into podcasts, and just to try and help you to understand what actually goes on in supermarkets, what goes on behind the scenes. And as I said, it's quite a fascinating industry to be in. Now, supermarkets. Well, supermarkets are extremely interesting because since I've written about the history of supermarkets. For example, the first supermarket actually opened in New York in 1930. And then the next opening was in the UK in 1948, and in New Zealand it came along in 1950, just a little ahead of Australia, but that was not a real supermarket. The real supermarket, and the definition of a supermarket is, the criteria is it has to sell not only packaged goods but also fresh, so that's fresh produce, meat, fish and so on. So that is the definition of a supermarket, and the first actual what was called American-style supermarket opened in New Zealand in 1958, and it was opened by a Chinese gentleman called Tom Archie, and he opened it in a suburb of Auckland, and that was called Food Town, and we've seen a lot of growth since. But it's interesting how supermarkets are actually starting to go to full circle, and the reason I say that is because, of course, the predecessor of the supermarket was the grocery store, the grocers. And you go in and there'll be a big counter, a bit like if you ever saw the Ronnie Barker sitcom Open All Hours with David Jason, you would understand what the original grocer's shop was. You go to the counter and you say what you want, and if it's flour or sugar or something loose, then the grocer will weigh it for you and put it in a brown bag. And it was the start of private label in many ways, because a lot of the things you bought in those days were actually from a big bin, and you just bought a pound of it, or we didn't have metric in those days, or a couple of pounds. And there were one or two brands, obviously, because things like tea and so on, that would have come in a brand, and one or two other things, and cornflakes, Kellogg's cornflakes. But there are a lot of things that you just put into a brown bag. and that was the start of private label before private label actually became branded. And so what's happening with the supermarkets, certainly we've seen it with Tesco recently, who decided that the only way to fight the German discounters was if you can't beat them, join them. And they've opened this Jack's range of stores, which are all own label, as it's called in the UK, own label only. And that's been an interesting development, because clearly they've looked at Aldi and Lidl and decided that the only way they're ever going to get anywhere near those two German discounters is to copy. And so they have copied with Jack's, which is private label, generally only private label, coming from Tesco stores. And Tesco's private label has developed a great deal over the years. And of course, we've got Tesco's Finest, which is really, really good. And nowadays, the private label, of course, is no longer a copy. When it originally started, it was a Me Too. They were just copying the big brands, and people who perhaps are budgeting and couldn't afford to buy the big brands could buy a copy, and that satisfied them. But I remember being told a story by somebody who's in New Zealand who worked for Sainsbury's at the time in the UK, and he told me the story of when Sainsbury's decided, quite in the, I think it was in the 80s, they decided that they were going to copy Coca-Cola. So they brought a copy of Coca-Cola out, called it Cola, and the design of the label was very similar colours to Coke, and Coke were furious. And so the boss of Sainsbury's at the time, he got a call from the boss of Coca-Cola in Atlanta, in the United States, and was ordered to go to Atlanta to have a meeting with the boss. So off he went, and he got there and sat down in front of him, and the boss of Coke said, "We are not happy about this. We don't want it to happen. You've got to stop doing this, because it's too much like our own product, and it's going to confuse people, and they'll be buying your product instead of ours." And the boss of Sainsbury's said, "Well, sorry, but that's our Coke, or it's not called Coke, it's Cola. That's our Cola, and we're sticking with it." And that was the really beginning of the development of the Me Too generation of private label. But then things have moved on, and Tesco showed how you can move on by introducing eventually Tesco Finest. And Tesco Finest, they do variants of various products that are not available in the other products that are the national brands. And so that has developed, and now we've seen this in New Zealand, because we only have two supermarket groups in New Zealand. We have a chain store, which is Countdown, and that's owned by Woolworths Australia, and they also have two franchise stores, which again they belong to Woolworths Australia. The brand does, the stores belong to the owner-operator, and that's Fresh Choice and Super Value. But on the other side of the coin, and the slightly largest of the two groups, is a cooperative, very much like the cooperative in the UK, and that's where the owner-operators actually own the wholesaler, which is Foodstuffs, and the wholesaler supplies most of the product that are found in these stores that are operated by owner-operators. And we have three of those. We have Pack and Save, which by the sound, what you can hear, it's started off when people were packing their own groceries, and they pack them in a box or whatever, and reduced discounted groceries, cheaper than anybody else. And another store in that group is New World, and that's a full range, whereas Pack and Save is not a full range supermarket. New World a full range, and that's not discounted, that's full price. And then they have a convenience store in the North Island called Foursquare, and in the South Island that's the supermarket, Foursquare Supermarket. And so what has been happening with both sides, because both sides have private label. Countdown has private label, which it uses the Woolworths private label brand, and most of it comes across what we call the ditch, the Tasman Sea from Australia. And some is made here, and some of that goes across the other way into Australia. For Foodstuffs has a value brand, and it also has a Pam's brand. And Pam's, which is just a made-up name, Pam's not too long ago introduced Pam's Finest, and the design of the packaging is very similar to Tesco Finest, and Pam's Finest has really taken off. They're doing so many different things that are not expected, certainly in this country, of private label, as we call it. And so what Foodstuffs in the South Island, and Foodstuffs in the South Island is run by a separate company to Foodstuffs North Island, although they're joined because they're part of the overall Foodstuffs New Zealand cooperative. They have introduced this Pam's discount store, which is just full of Pam's Finest and the other value, and all the private label brands. There are one or two other things, one or two gourmet things, one or two craft products, but mainly it's private label, and that's just started in a place called Amberley, which is just south in North Canterbury, just south of in North Canterbury, just near Christchurch, and that is in its trial stage at the moment, because they obviously will wait and see how that develops and how that grows as to whether they're going to spread this into other parts of the country. And clearly Foodstuffs in the North Island will be looking at it to see how it goes. But it's very much a Jack's approach to it, rather than having a totally different company doing it. And I can see the reasoning. I think the reasoning very simply is that across the Tasman we have Aldi. Now Aldi's been in Australia for 20 years, and they have registered a company in New Zealand, and they've got a New Zealand website which actually takes you to the Aldi website in Australia, and you can order things online from Aldi and they will be sent to New Zealand. So Aldi has been so busy expanding in Australia. It started off on what we call the Eastern Seaboard by doing Brisbane and Sydney and Melbourne, then moved to Adelaide, and they've eventually gone to West Australia, which is a long way away from Eastern Australia, and it's actually closer for Sydney and Melbourne to come to New Zealand, to Auckland, than it is to go to Perth. Perth's a 5-hour flight from New Zealand, so it's a little less from Sydney and Melbourne, but it's still a long way away. So they've gone into Western Australia, and they're growing the Western Australian end of the business. And so we haven't seen any arrival in New Zealand, but the word has been out some time ago that Aldi executives did visit Auckland and have a look around Auckland, and I guess they were talking to real estate companies as well, to look at the situation here, and obviously to look at the supermarket situation here, but nothing more has been heard since. And I think Foodstuffs have put this store into the market to try and discourage Aldi from maybe stepping across the Tasman. Now, if Aldi is going to do that, it would be sooner rather than later, because they obviously are not stupid, and they can see that this new store with generally Pam's only product inside it, if it works, they're going to spread to other parts of the country. And Aldi, if it's wise, it will take the opportunity to come into Auckland sooner rather than later, because once it's in Auckland, I don't think having a Pam's private label store will actually succeed against Aldi, because Aldi is so successful. It's been hugely successful in Australia, and it's doing really business. It's taking more and more of a share of the supermarket industry in the country, and it's sourcing most of its product locally. And so there are a lot of suppliers, not only in Australia but in New Zealand, who are supplying Aldi. And of course it's a very successful store. It's the same format as the Aldis all over the world, and they use the one-offs, the products that come in that are non-grocery products that come in just for a week, and once they're gone, they're gone. And they use that as a sprat to catch the mackerel. And certainly if you look, where I've been to Australia a number of times, and I normally go in an Aldi, and you can judge how successful Aldi is by the car park, because if you look in the car park, you'll see a lot of BMWs and Mercedes and so on there, because it's an attraction. And the thing with Aldi is that they are so hot on quality. Now, yes, the food is cheaper, and the brands you've never heard of, because they're private label brands. They just dream up a name for a product, and away you go. So they don't call anything Aldi, and that's a very clever move on their part. And they are doing very well with the businesses with the stores in Australia. They've got about 400 now in Australia, and going great guns. And it is these one-offs that attract people in the store. And when you buy a product, because of the quality is so high, people go back for more, because they're buying something cheap, but they're buying something that's good quality, and they obviously test it and see. You've got to suck it and see if this works. And it works for a lot of customers who go in there, and I've been in there and bought things, and I've never had a complaint about it. It's really good. And they're doing alcohol as well, and they're getting obviously brands in that situation, although they're undoubtedly doing some private label beers and wines that you wouldn't know they're a private label. But it's been a very successful venture for Aldi in Australia, obviously through the number of stores they now have. So whether they come here, we'll just have to wait and see, because we're always getting little whispers of Aldi are coming, Aldi are coming. And the media always drops this in every now and again. And we should just have to see. But they need to think about moving, and they obviously, what they will do, they'll need to move fast, and they'll probably have visited this store in the South Island, this PAM store, just to see what it's like and how it's doing, and they'll be monitoring that situation. Undoubtedly they've got one or two sleepers in the country who pop into stores and keep an eye on things, and then report back to Aldi in Australia, save them coming over. So I think if the PAM store takes off, then that will be the spur to Aldi to go for it and to come into this country. But we'll just have to wait and see. But this is the sort of industry it is. It's an industry that develops as it goes along. It doesn't stand still. You can't afford to stand still in this industry. You have to move on. If you don't move on, you get left behind, because you start standing still. And once you start standing still, because the competition is going great guns, you're going to go backwards. So therefore, it is an industry. There's always something new coming along, new stores, new things in stores, new ways of doing supermarketing. And for example, this store that I talked about is Pam's store in Amberley. Now, they have got no manned checkouts in there. They're all self-service checkouts. And this is another direction we're moving in. But checkouts have actually almost reached the point where some stores don't even use them anymore. Some stores use an app, and you obviously have to sign up and register your app, but you can go in and you can scan the products you're buying, and then just or whatever system they use, when you check out of the store, they don't even need to check your basket, although undoubtedly they do that from time to time. But it's that sort of store. It's a new approach to getting rid of checkouts. But we actually have an interesting store group, the Pack and Save group, that we have in the south of the North Island. Once upon a time, there were 3 foodstuffs companies. There was Foodstuffs Auckland, Foodstuffs Wellington, which is the capital of the country and is in the South Island, and Foodstuffs South Island. What happened with the Pack and Save group in the lower North Island was they decided to go into a self-scan operation. So it's called Shop and Go. And what you do is you sign up and you get a swipe card, just a plastic swipe card like a credit card, and you swipe by a gun, a little scanning machine, looks like a gun, and that releases the scanner, and then you can go around and you can scan all the things you're buying and put them in your trolley or in your basket, and then you can go to a checkout and then just give the scanner over to the checkout operator, and they can download the receipt, and then you pay and off you go. And that speeds up the whole operation. It has been very successful. But what they do is they check you. When you do it first time, they check you first time you go through a normal till, and they double check on what you've got to make sure everything has been scanned. And then they'll do it a second time sometime later. Now, if they find anything in your trolley or your basket that hasn't been scanned, then they give you the benefit of the doubt and say, oh, you missed one here, and they scan it and off you go, and they just make a note of that. So next time they scan you, when you come in again, it might not be the next time you shop, but another time. If they find anything else in there that hasn't been scanned, then they just take your swipe card away and you can't use the system anymore. So that's how they get round people who are trying to dodge the system. And it's actually interesting with the recent visit to the UK of President Trump, and how just before that, the Queen went into her first supermarket. She had never been to a supermarket before, and she was invited by Sainsbury's to go into a supermarket, and she was shown this self-checkout machine, and she said, oh, do some people try and fiddle this and not scan things, not pay for things? And that was interesting, and so she'd thought that as well, and that certainly is the case with this Shop and Go, that they keep an eye on it. But strangely enough, that system was never spread to the rest of the country. It remained in the lower North Island, which is an interesting one, because you would have thought they would. But the lower North Island foodstuffs were quite innovative, because they also introduced the pricing on the shelves. They introduced digital pricing some years ago, so that good for customers because easy to see, but also brilliant for the stores, because what they would do, and every Monday morning the prices are changed, like I'm sure all over the world with supermarkets, and it takes a long time for that to be done manually, because someone has to go around and change the tickets and make sure they've done it correctly and so on, and it can take the best part of a Monday to do it, and can cause confusion, because when a customer comes in, the till has already been reset. So therefore, it can work both ways. Sometimes they haven't got round to taking the specials off from the previous week, and so a customer goes and sees something on special, takes it to the till, and the price at the till is higher because it's no longer on special, and that can cause problems. But the other thing is they don't get round to putting the specials for the week all up. So a number of customers might have quite a pleasant surprise when they go to the checkout and find that actually it's cheaper than they expected. But it's so much faster. It takes half an hour for the store to change the prices completely throughout the store. And most of that time will be taken up by the serve-overs, where they're doing, you're going and getting your deli or your meat serve-over, your fish serve-over, and they're having to do that manually on those. But otherwise, for the rest of the packaged goods area, it's a very quick process. So coming back to what I was saying before, this new store, which is private label only, is almost going back to the days when we had the grocer, where it all went in a brown bag. And of course, added to that, the no plastic situation, where people just do not want plastic. They don't want plastic carrier bags or shopping bags. They don't want their produce wrapped in plastic, or their bakery or their deli, and so they want bags, and it just reminds me of going back to the time when they were put in bags, when everything was put in bags. I can remember going into a Sainsbury's before Sainsbury's became a supermarket, and the Sainsbury's in those days was a store that was quite narrow. It wasn't a very wide store, and it had counters on each side all the way down to the bottom, and you'd go to a counter and you'd ask for what you wanted, and you'd be served, and it would be put in a brown bag or a white bag, and you get a little tear off, what can I call it, a sort of indicator of how much it's costing, and you take this little tear off piece of paper along to a cashier, which was right at the far end of the store, and you'd hand it into the cashier, and then you'd pay in cash, no credit cards then or debit cards in those days, for what you got. And you had to go to each of these counters to get what you wanted, so you can imagine it was a long process. And people didn't do big shops like they do today, and even those are going the other way. They would go and buy just what they wanted for the day or a couple of days, and then go back next time and buy some more. And they'd have to go to each different counter to buy the different things. So it was a long process. And it just reminded me where we're going back to this situation where we don't want plastic bags, we want paper bags. And it's almost like turning the clock back in a strange sort of way. But that's what's happening in supermarkets. They never stand still. They're always developing, because they're looking over their shoulders at the competition. And the competition has changed as well, because what is happening is people have gone online. And so you have online competition, and you can also buy your goods online and you can have it delivered, or you can do click and collect, where you go to the store and you collect whatever you've bought from, and you say when you're going in on online, you say what time you're going in the store and they have it ready for you, and then off you go. And a lot of people prefer that, because the problem with deliveries is that you can you've got to say when you're going to be at home, and it's not always going to work, because maybe you're delayed getting home, and you get home and you've missed the delivery and it's gone, and this sort of thing. So if you do click and collect, you can nominate when you're getting to the store, and between A to B times, and then you can collect and take it home, which can be a lot easier. And another useful thing for click and collect is that one of the drawbacks of shopping in supermarkets is the repeats, the top-ups that you have to do. You're just going to buy the same thing again that you want because you like that particular brand, and you're running out, so you want some more. And this takes up sort of dead time because it's automatic. So the click and collect can help you there, because what you do is the things you're buying all the time, it will ask you when you go online, oh, do you want any more of this? Do you want any more of that? And you click the things that you're regularly topping up, and then if you decide you don't like to buy your produce online, or you don't like to buy your meat, you prefer to buy that in store, then all the things you don't care about looking at, you just want to top up, you put all those through the click and collect. And then you get to the store, say, half an hour before you've said you're going to pick up the click and collect stuff, and you can browse then, and you can go around and you can choose your nice wine you want for a nice meal this evening, and your cut of meat and your produce, and the things that you want to spend more time on, you can spend more time on. And then the things that are just a top up, you then, when you finish doing your more interesting browsing and got those, then you go and get your click and collect top ups, and off you go. So it's a good system, and it can solve that particular problem if you don't want the hassle of just doing the top-ups, but you still want to go to the store, and you're going to collect anyway, so you can kill two birds with one stone. So that's some of the developments that are happening in supermarkets, and which I will be touching upon as we go along. That's one innovation we've had. And what I do every week is that I have a lot of contacts, not only in New Zealand, but in Australia, around the world. And I bring you up to date with new things that are coming along and of interest to you, whichever. I mainly am concentrating on, obviously, Australia and New Zealand, the United States and the UK, all the English-speaking countries, and which is where the biggest supermarket operations are. And of course it's English, so that helps, as that's the only language I should be using. Now, one other thing we are doing today, and we're going to take you on a little trip, because one of the interesting developments that's been in the world is that we have got a new machine that is now in some supermarkets, not in all. It started off in other parts of the world and it came to New Zealand last year. But one of the things that's a big hassle that I've always found with fresh fruit, and one of the fresh fruits I really enjoy are pineapples. But they're such a hassle to cut them, and I always found it difficult to get all the outer skin off. It's a tough bird to deal with, a pineapple. And along has come a machine that actually does it all for you. It arrived in this country in late last year. And it's been produced by Dole. Dole have had it made for them. They're not a machine manufacturer, but they've had it made. And in fact, it's another version of it that's now been made by another company in Germany, a slightly different version to the one that Dole has been doing. But it actually sorts out your pineapple, cuts it all up for you, and away you go with it already cut. It takes the hassle out of, it takes the core out, and it takes the outer, the skin off. But easier for me to explain it by introducing you to the Dole country manager in New Zealand, who he looks after the fresh, so he looks after the bananas, pineapples, and the mangoes and the other things that come to New Zealand, mainly from the Philippines, for Dole. And so I'll now hand over to Steve Barton, who's the Dole country manager. Steve.
Thanks, John. Take a Dole fresh pineapple from the Philippines, place it in the door of the machine here, either way up, it won't matter. Close it, take the bottle, which is barcoded, place it at the back of the machine, and push the button. Tops and bottoms, takes the core and the shell off. And there you go. Fresh pineapple. Put your lid on and off to the till.
Steve Barton is the General Manager of Dole New Zealand. He's here with me today. Now, Steve, where did the idea for this wonderful machine that now can do it all for you, where did it come from?
The idea originated in the Netherlands. An engineer by the name of Pierre came up with the idea during the course of working in the produce industry, looking for innovations. He met with an industrialist who had developed bacterial testing machines for the dairy industry. Between the two of them, they created a business, built a factory, and designed and started building the machines.
So how long did it take to develop the machine?
I think the development took 3 to 4 years. They had one machine which went reasonably well, but as you know, with these things, you find problems, and they went on from there.
And what was the most difficult part of the process to perfect?
Most difficult part of the process was actually twofold. One is the hygiene standards that are required. So you're developing a piece of machinery around stainless steel, and you're developing it around plastics which will not allow bacteria to grow on the inside of the machine. And then there comes the processes of actually cutting, the engineering of cutting cleanly and moving the fruit without bruising. So there are actually a number of factors involved there.
Right, okay. When was the first machine launched? Presumably it wasn't launched in New Zealand. Was it launched somewhere else?
It was launched in Europe, in Germany. Roermond is the city where they build, which is basically no more than 10 minutes from the German border. There are a number of large supermarkets in Germany who are looking for something like this.
Right. And when did it come to New Zealand?
It came to New Zealand 18 months ago, and we had it on trial for some period of time in the supermarkets before we offered it on a permanent basis.
Okay, and which supermarkets, which banner supermarkets are they in?
Foodstuffs, and particularly New World, were very keen to start with, and that's where they are now.
Right, and what difference on that first weekend that the machine was up and running in a New World, what difference did it make to the pineapple sales?
It was twofold. There's an element of theatre, so it drew a considerable amount of attention. And then the sales themselves followed. We were having 500 to 600% increase in sales.
Wow, goodness gracious!
That was phenomenal.
Yeah, I can imagine it would. And do people who get the ready pineapple, do they have to pay more?
No. The retail value is set by the store, of course. The idea was that you had the option of taking it home, cutting it yourself, which some people prefer to do, or using the machine. The idea was to keep the volume of sales going through at a same price level so we could judge what the decision making was all about, so that price didn't come into it, basically.
Right, okay. So you paid the same whether you took it unblemished or whether you took it already prepared?
Correct.
Right, okay. Since then, obviously, you've installed more of these. Have each machine had a similar impact in stores when they went in?
Yes, the sales increase has been considerable, some more than others. Some are, obviously, there's a range of demographics. We have a machine, actually two machines in the centre of Wellington City, and then we have some in rural areas, Auckland suburban areas. The lowest increase is 200% increase in sales on a weekly basis.
Wow, good.
Highest continues to be about 500 or 600%. I'd say the average sits about 400.
And these stores are all owner operated because Foodstuffs is a cooperative society. Mm-hmm. What's been the feedback from the owner operators?
They love it. They enjoy the theatre. They enjoy the increase in sales. And especially in areas where there's a beach atmosphere. Whitianga is a classic place. It's part of the summer fruit cocktail mix, and it serves the product well, it serves the department well.
Good. And as we did this morning, we shot earlier a scene with Steve operating the machine, and it is so simple to use that just before we started there was a mum with her 3-year-old, and actually the 3-year-old operated the machine, obviously under mum's instructions, but it's that simple.
It is. We have some interesting situations. For some reason, pineapple is especially attractive to children. They love the flavour and taste. And they put pressure on mum to use the machine and buy a pineapple, where ordinarily they may not. And it's not unusual for mum to arrive at the checkout and find that the children have gone back and put another 1 or 2 bottles in the trolley, which of course we encourage.
Well done,
Yeah.
good. Now, that's the end of my podcast for this week. I'm on every week. You'll find me as well as on YouTube. I'm on Spotify, and I'm on the podcast section of iTunes, which obviously has changed. So look for me there. Now, I also do a radio show in New Zealand. That's Magic Talk, and I'm on live on Saturday mornings in New Zealand at 8:30. Now, the programme, the way to pick me up, because obviously a lot of you won't be in New Zealand, if you go to magic.co.nz, which is our Magic Talk website, and then you go to Talk, which is at the top of an orange lozenge at the top of the page, and then go to Shows when you're into the Talk section of the website, and scroll down to Weekend, and you'll find the Home and Garden Show, and I'm on the Home and Garden Show just after 8:30 on a Saturday morning. You'll have to look up the time to see when it's in your country. Just after Food News. We have Food News briefly, and then we go straight into Magic Talk, and that'll be I'm talking about New Zealand and Australia. Occasionally I mention the UK and the United States, so you can catch me there. So thanks for tuning in, and see you again next week.